Hello and welcome everyone to this week's seminar. We are very happy to have Christoph Ellersgaard and Anton Grau Larsen here presenting their study Mapping the Power Elites of Welfare States. And Christoph Ellersgaard is an associate professor at the Department of Organization at Copenhagen Business School. His research focuses on how elites can be domesticated by different societal institutions. And to this end, he studies how elites change historically and from one country to another, and develops new methods for mapping elites by studying their networks, careers, lifestyle, and ideology. And Anton Grau Larsen is also an associate professor, but at the Department of Social Sciences and Businesses at Roskilde University. His research is focused on statistical programming of network data and the biographical data on elites and classes. In particular, his research interests lie in how to combine relational sociological theories with descriptive and visual quantitative and qualitative methods. After this introduction, I give the word to you. Really look forward to this interesting presentation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us here. It's a wild setup with high tech. It's great stuff. So I'm Anton, and this is Christoph, and we'll talk you. I'll get you through our talk, which is on it's a view over most of our work over which we've been working on power elites and for.
15 years.
15 years. It's like it went past in an instant because it was so much fun. So we're going to talk a bit about the theoretical framework, like why power elites, why we care about them, and then most of our work is very empirical. So you're going to see tons of empirics because that's how we think, and then. So there's some how to identify the power elite, and then its composition, and then we're gonna look at some of the drivers of what influences the composition of an elite. Like why is the elite as it is, and don't get your expectations up too much. It's still very early on that, and then obviously we're looking very much forward to your questions and comments. Okay. So let's start out with the why even bother with elites and with power elites specifically. So it's a very tiny. It's a study of a very tiny group. It's what could be in one room, a bit bigger than this one, probably. So this is a picture of what could be one of a connected elite group in Denmark. This is a community of business leaders, and you can see here they're fairly similar in this case, right? Same gender, same class, same hat style. Almost everyone has the same. He's a bit different. And the study of elites, looking at these small groups, that we can ask questions about what is valued in a society, what types of power have influence, what type of people have access to power. And we can characterize a society whether in this case in Denmark in the 1910s it's dominated by businessmen, or is it the army or whatever, right? So we can say a lot about a society through the lens of its elite, even if the elite is tiny. And there's been substantial change through this. Okay, so elites as a concept is a very contested concept, both in sociology and in society as such. It's a fairly misused concept because it's both over and under defined. If we go through the literature and the classic positions, we would have if we start out with the sociological tradition of elite studies, then you have the classics from Wilfredo Pareto. His definition of an elite is, I guess, somewhat what the common sense definition of an elite would be, or a pluralistic idea of an elite. So that in that sense, you have different hierarchies in society. So you have a hierarchy of sports, a hierarchy of wealth, a hierarchy of law, and on top of each hierarchy, there is a little group which is disproportionately more powerful than the rest, and then they would make up the elite. And then you can see you have like tons of different hierarchies, and then the elite would be the top slice of that. But the elites themselves are not combined; they're not connected, and there's a struggle over what types of hierarchies might be influential. When you're studying the elite through this perspective, which in Denmark has been the most common perspective, then you start out with defining, like it should say, okay, we need to look at specific sectors. We need to define which sectors are influential in the society. Then we take we go through whatever might be. So you have like business, you have law, state, and then you choose positions through some sort of ranking mechanism, and then you define like what. Then you hash out the composition of the elite basically through your theoretical definition, right? So you say, well, there's going to be 100 politicians, 12 bishops, and whatever. But that's somewhat that's unsatisfactory, because we know that not every hierarchy is equally influential. So let's say there's a sector in sports, and you have the people who are in the elite, the most accomplished sports people. Are they part of a governing and elite in society? Probably not. So we would think that we need to differentiate between which types of hierarchies would be included in any form of elite, because not every form of power counts. And in here comes to our help Pierre Bourdieu and his concept of the field of power, which would be here different hierarchies and different fields struggle over what types of power that are that should be counted, right?
Yeah. So basically, what we want to argue is that in order to not just make elite studies about everybody who's particularly good within some field, that we should look at those fields that gain access to power. So we want to tie the notion of elites to the notion of societal power. And in a very broad sense, here we draw on Michael Mann's work. We can kind of differentiate between 4 different sources of power: the economy, the state, the military, and ideology. And of course, those of you who are familiar with the works of power knows that it's a very an even more concept than elites. But basically, I think our approach to power is that a good definition of elites actually look at elites who wields all these forms or phases of power. So both power as coercion, power as agenda setting, power as manipulation, power as deterrence, and power as subjectification, or at least not necessarily in a single individual or organization or institution, but actually the combination. And here we come to the notion of the power elite, which is from C. Wright Mills, which has this idea that these different institutional orders, which is kind of similar to the forms of power that Mann describes later on, actually are characterized by having particular individuals overlapping at the very top. And depending on the particular historical context, the importance of these orders differs. Of course, in theocracy, the religious order is much more important than it is in a secular welfare state. And similar in a military dictatorship, the military plays a role, but that we can imagine how these different orders are integrated also within an elite group. And actually the interesting thing here is that these elites need to meet, be in networks, in order to create trust and cohesion, at least in the case of a stable society. So if these elite networks fragment, we will have those who hold these different kinds of power be in a sort of rivalry or civil war or something similar. So we cannot always expect to observe a power elite, but if we observe a power elite in a society, it gives us a really good idea about the strength of the particular institutional orders in that society. So that's basically a very humble question we ask: which forms of power is the most important in a society? And we've tried to develop a methodology through the study of elites to actually come up with an empirical answer to that very abstract question.
Yeah, and let's move to that. So, how do we find power elites? We rely on as you saw from the slide on Cyril Mills, like the important thing is that the different elites are overlapping, that they have social interaction with each other. Either for Mills, it's both through careers and through direct sharing of power. But so social networks is a key mechanism of delineating the power elite. So basically, if there's no connections between the different sectors, then you don't have a power elite. Then it's a pluralistic system where elites are not connected. And so what we propose is we'll show you is a method where we use social network analysis to identify a core in a wider network of elites, and what we rely on is a mechanism of status homophily. So, which means that if you're a powerful person, you want to be associated with other powerful people. So, let's say I'm the chairman of a board, and I need to find a new member of that board. So I'm going to look out, see if I can find someone who is at the same level as me, or has some really interesting resources that I might want to connect with. So let's say I'm the chairman of Danske Bank, the major Danish bank, and I'm looking out in the network, and I can see, a researcher, elite scholar, that could be really good, but what does he bring to the table, right? Does he have a lot of economic capital? No. Does he have a lot of nice contacts to like ministers or the national bank? No. Okay, but does he know rich families? Like, is he from good credentials? No. So it's not going to be him. It's going to be someone else. And so the one I choose, because I can choose whoever I want, is going to have a profile which is really nice and acceptable. And the more times that you're weighed and your profile is accepted, that means that your profile is good. And that means that the more places that you are integrated into, and the more powerful those people are in those places, then it's going to be highly correlated to your own power profile and your own resources. Okay. And given that there is this mechanism and there's this wider network, there's going to be a core and a periphery, and we're going to find the core in that elite or in that network. And the main simple questions for that is the size of it, like how big is that core, and its composition, like does it include the main forms of power, and then if that holds, it's a power elite. Okay, so let's look at the data that we've used, and we've done this 3 times: 2012, 2017, and in 2024. And we've changed slightly on the methods, which is why it's not in one table. But the main gist of it is that we collect affiliation networks, which is boards, commissions, places where people meet physically and discuss, often strategy in some sense. And most often it's a place where they would meet and steer some kind of organization. Okay, and we have around for each slice, around 5 to 7,000 of these affiliations. So it's a middle-size network, and around 50,000 positions and around 40,000 people in that network. And it's everything that's connected to the state, royal events, politics, foundations, largest organizations, largest corporations and whatnot.
Yeah, so the idea is if we can in any way imagine that something could be an important meeting place, then we include it.
Yeah.
So for instance, with organizations, that's all NGOs that sends hearing responses. So it's all from Confederation of Danish Industry to Save the Cat Foundation. So if Denmark is ruled by cat ladies, we would know it.
It is very inclusive setup, right?
Yeah. This is, by the way, what Anna got funding to do together with us.
Cat lady research is going to be great.
We will try to create a similar data set of all potentially powerful Swedish decision making for us.
Yes. Okay. So then you imagine like a vast network, which looks kind of like this, but somewhat larger.
Cat ladies out here.
Cat ladies in the periphery, and within that network you have around 7,000 linkers, which is people who sit on multiple boards. And if you're going to be a Power Elite member, you're at least going to be a linker, because you have to be. So that's just okay. That's substantially fewer than the around 40,000, and then you can see there is inside of the core. There's inside the network. There's some who are a lot more central than the others. And what we do is that we use like a specific core detection algorithm, which kind of peels the network here like an onion, and then at a certain point, the inner core is not more dense than what the last peel it peeled off, and then it has like a natural stop point. So it says, okay, this is the innermost core of the network. And for all 3 samples, or for all 3 years, that core is around 400 people. So it's a very stable phenomenon. Yeah.
So
and so just to illustrate.
Yeah. Just there's 2 small points here on the 400 people, which is actually important. We can fit them into an airplane with a little bit of good luck. Just imagine in the sense of kind of the cohesion it creates, that this is a number of individuals that people can actually handle in a group size. There will be they're very well connected, there will be easy knowledge transfers. Also, if people misbehave in some way, people will know. And the other important thing is the network looks like this, which means there is one core. Like we could imagine societies where there were 2 competing cores. That's at least what we would expect, for instance, based on what was made in the Swedish power studies in 1990, that there were huge fractioning within the Swedish elite, not based on network analysis, but on other stuff, but potentially. And I guess that could also be the case in the US right now, in the potential split between Republicans and Democrats. I don't know how the networks would actually precisely look in the US, but I think 2 important findings: 400 people, 1 core, everything meets at the middle. There's not competing fractions of the Danish elite.
So this is an example of what a really, really nice network would look like. This is the pension fund manager. And
the chair of CBS.
Yeah.
Institution.
So this is him in his own network, and this is the different affiliation, the places that he goes to. And if it's a colored dot, it's another Power Elite member. So he meets a lot of other Power Elite members. And these Power Elite members here, they meet multiple places. So yeah, you can see like how it's firmly knit together. If we took our network, it would just be blank. So most people would have.
In the new data, we've
nothing.
cheated and added our own.
Yeah, we have one. We have a little association, so we have like one.
So we're
but that's how it looks. Okay, so we've found the Power Elite. So let's see how we know the size of it. It's around 400 people, fairly smallish. Now, how is it composed?
Yeah. So there were 2 main questions. There was the size. Is there a Power Elite? Yes, 400 people. Who are they? Well, they're these people. This is the network of 400 people. And we have colored them by what we think is most illustrative of the form of power they represent, namely the organization that they hire them. Because almost all of these people are CEOs or chairs, or at least C-level executives in organizations. So this is also a leadership network. It's if you're not included in these circles, if you're not a top-level executive. But the colors here are based on what type of organization you're then the leader of. The blue dots are the large Danish corporations. The light blue dots are the business associations. And those two colors, light and dark blue, compose a little bit more than half of the network. So around half of the network represents corporate interest. Then, in the Danish case, there are 4 other groups of interest. There's the red dots, which are the union leaders. There are the black dots, which are the politicians. There are the purple dots, which are the senior civil servants. And then finally we have the green dots, which are the people from academia, and they are our rectors or professors in economics.
No sociologists.
Yeah, no surprises here. The politicians are, interestingly enough, in a system where we in Denmark have now, after the last election, 12 parties of almost equal size. It's not the case here. It's social democrats, it's conservatives, and it's liberals and moderates only. So it's only kind of the centrist governing parties that are found here. Senior civil servants are primarily from the ministries associated with economy, not silly stuff like culture or health or other stuff. And that's basically.
And from the business elite, it's mainly just the largest corporations, like the 200 largest firms, and that the Confederation of Industry. So it's export oriented industry.
Yeah, these are the most central people. So the royal family, as a symbolic integrative thing, is actually important. It's actually the most well-connected state official. I don't expect you to know these, but we can rank them by their network reach. But of course, the network reach means that they keep bridges in the network and not that they're necessarily the most powerful, because this method also has limitations. So there is limitations to where a cabinet member or the prime minister can sit, and in particular, for instance, in the case of the prime minister, she is also part of a lot of globally relevant networks that don't pop up, of course, in our data, because Ursula von der Leyen in our network would just be a random name. So don't expect this to be that precise, but the 2 most central individuals are really interesting, because one is a union leader, it's this guy, he's called Claus Jensen, and the other is the leader of the Danish Confederation of Industry. The union leader is not the leader of the largest union, but the leader of the Union of Metal Workers, which are the ones who organize the industry workers. And more importantly, it's also the ones that in the system of collective bargaining in Denmark negotiate the first collective bargaining agreement that sets the standard for everyone else. So they are part of this export-oriented growth model and are key players in there. And is it then because that they're just really good networkers, these people? They are good networkers. This is actually the predecessor of Lars, called Carsten, but he was also the chief of the Confederation of Danish Industry, and that's because in 2017 it was these 2 people who were the most central. And the masseuse is the union leader, and in 2012 it was also a union leader from the Danish leader or from the Danish Union of Metal Workers that was leader, but it was the massage-giving person's predecessor, Torgild. So a lot of these positions are tied to the organization and the particular setup of the Danish political economy. And so, of course, networks is also about being able to give a good massage or massaging people in the right way, but it's not really the most important thing here. There's a lot of stability on the level of the organization. And that's actually one of the things that got us worried when we started studying this across years, because when we looked in 2017, look back to 2012, less than half of the people were the same. So we were thinking, are we looking just a phenomenon here of a network that's just changing? But when we looked at organizational stability, 80% of the people were leaders of an organization that were also part of the network the last time. 15% were also affiliated or sitting in the board of an organization that were in there. So the real change was about 5%. And when we did this again in 2024, there was even more churn in the number of individuals, but again, the organizational setup was around that 4/5 of the organizations were the same leaders. So, when we look at, we can also kind of divide this into, these were the individuals, but when we look not only at individuals but organizations, we see that in particular the political parties look even more important. I'll just skip through these because these are just old networks of organizations, because I wanted to bring you to this. Because this is not, it is a little bit like Find 5 Errors, if you know the children's book, because this is the networks of how they look, but you can see that the coloring setup is pretty much the same. The type, the distribution of sectors is pretty much the same. And the way that they are connected also, that there are, I said, there is a power lead, it's well integrated, but there are some clusters around sectors here, but it remains a lot of the same. The only real major change we've observed from 12 to 24 is that the proportion of individuals from business associations have increased, and the proportion of people from that are corporate leaders have decreased. So we see a higher degree of professionalization of the political representation of the corporate sector, but overall the corporate, if we take business associations and large corporation leaders together, they've been hovering around 53-54% in all 3 time periods. So basically the story we can tell about these elite networks is that in Denmark we have a very stable institutional setup.
Even with a massive churn of individuals.
The second question you of course can ask is then, who are these people? What type of lifestyle or personality do the people who run Denmark has? Because that's also important. How do these people think? And there's a myth that elites are middle-aged white men, and we're very happy to completely confirm that myth. They are on average 57 years. They are not a single person with a non-Western immigrant or children of immigrant background in Denmark, even though they compose more than 6% of the overall population. So it's extremely white. These are the foreign national born, so you can see that primarily the royal family brings diversity into the Danish networks. However, something is happening with how much. They're still men, but actually we moved from 19% women in 12 to in 24, 31% women. So around 1 percentage point rise in women every year in this period, primarily driven by the fact that the gender representation in business was extremely low in 12 and has increased a lot. Don't put too much attention into organizations here because there are only 5 people. So it's just that 4 of those 5 are women. So don't interpret that. We can also see that even though we sometimes often argue that, and can see in general that welfare states create quite high levels of social mobility, this does not really reach the elite. Almost a third of the elite is recruited from the top 1% or the upper classes, and only around 12 percent on average in these 2 years are from the working classes. So a huge or very disproportionate representation of different elite groups. They're also concentrated in the capital, Copenhagen here, but more specifically in the most affluent areas of Copenhagen. So this is the Copenhagen Djursholm, right? So that's where they live, and if some of them get lost and move to the more areas where the popular classes live, then it's typically politicians or union leaders who have not learned how to buy their house in the right place. Lastly, what type of thinking do they have? We've already talked a little bit about the economy professors. They can be rest assured that the other people they will talk to are also economists. Or business administration, law, political science, was classic like hard social sciences, which in Denmark includes political science that dominates and increasingly dominates, because actually we see a huge decrease just in the period we follow this in the STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics background, that drops by a third in the period we've studied it. They're also from the most prestigious and old institutions.
And those were the characteristics that where they are similar, like where the power elite members are the same. But if we look at the key divisions within the power elite, we've used like a method that you may know from Pierre Bourdieu, like the multiple correspondence analysis, like a field analysis, in our hope to reconstruct the Danish field of power. So basically, it asked the question: what types of power are influential in society, and what are the divisions? What's the main fault lines and struggle lines within the field of power? And not very surprising, you have like there's a capital volume thing. Like, so those with the most, those who are high amounts of power and who have high seniority in the power elite, or who are family from the upper classes, versus newcomers, so people from unions and whatnot, on the one side. And then the secondary division, as you would expect from Pierre Bourdieu, you would expect like economic, cultural capital thing. But we have something slightly different, which is on the one side everything that's private, so private business, but also private in the sense that you don't participate in the general public sphere, you don't write books, you are not covered, you hide yourself. There's you don't show yourself so much. Versus everything that's public on the other side. And so this would be politicians, it would be professors and whatnot. But it's not cultural capital as you would expect it, because there's no one from the cultural elite or whatever, and they're not particularly cultured. So they're politicians, so they're popular in that sense. And what we find here is a really interesting fault line, which is everything below this point here is people who are elected in some sense, versus those up here who are not elected. So the main fault line in the Danish field of power is between anyone with any sort of democratic mandate versus those without, which, we find is quite interesting. We've also looked at how they got there. So, like, what was the path that led them to getting into the power elite? And we wanted to see if there is like both different types of paths, and we can say, well, yes, there is. Some are faster, some are more complex, but there are quite different pathways into the elite depending on the sector that you represent. So if you're from unions, you have a particular path. If you're from within business, you have a particular path. So they're not the same there. But there is similarities in their careers anyway, which is we then made what we think is like a new trick, which is to map the careers as a network. So if two people have been at the same place, well, they're connected, right? Then the careers, the organizations are connected, and those that are central are then the career hubs, those where many careers pass through. And this was really surprising for us. So there are some really central career hubs. There are just half of all the 400 members of the Power Elite have been through just 17 organizations. And you have to think that like any organization could be in this data set or would be a potential career. But just 17 has had half of the Power Elite members in through them. So it's the University of Copenhagen, but not as a student, as a real hire. The Ministry of Finance, A.P. Møller-Mærsk, the big shipping giant, Danske Bank, the University Confederation of Industry, the Ministry, Nordea, the Social Democrats, the Liberal Party. So these are the main hubs where you have to go through to enter the elite. And so it's not about the size of the organization or the power of the organizations. It's the specific value of having been through these places that really matters. And we think that's one of the mechanisms for why the social background is so skewed, because knowing how to navigate this organizational landscape is likely to be very classed. Okay. Oh, we've also talked to them.
We talked to a lot of them. We've even made a radio program on National Public Radio called The Voices of Power. So we've talked to them about these careers. But I think one of the things that's of course interesting also to see is how stuff matters. And we've done a paper with good British colleagues because we found something really interesting. So here I have a quote from a British leader, which says basically, in the UK, to be part of the elite, you have to be an original thinker. You have to be smart and think out of the box. For the Danish elite, that's not the case. Basically, this is Sten Skyby. He says, in my opinion, success is only achieved through hard work. This is a proper Scandinavian, right? We work hard. He said, you may be very clever, you may be very talented, but if you don't put in the hours, then it's not. It's very, very hard for us in the interviews to get these elites to actually say they think they're clever. They're just like, or that they had a strategy. Basically say, I worked hard and my boss just saw me, and then they can kind of say, I had a mentor who thought I was really brilliant, but the way I do it is I'm able to put in the hours. And this is of course also, we think, a product as well of different types of elite reproduction. In the UK, Oxbridge is extremely important. So getting in there and getting your legitimacy through a world-class educational institution is important. Not to disrespect our respective workplaces, but we don't have world-class educational institutions in Denmark.
But at least not selective ones.
But the organizations, the career hubs, Anton just talked you through, are really, really important. And what do they say in the Ministry of Finance, one of the important career hubs? We also interviewed the former permanent secretary there, and he says, I don't care if your analysis is brilliant if you don't have it ready on time. I need you to meet the deadlines. And they have like this extreme work culture where they just basically work people to divorce, work people really down. But it's not about being clever, it's about doing a lot of work. Of course not. Of course, I think they're clever as well, but it's very much this kind of work culture that is reproduced in these career hubs, which is what gives these elites their legitimacy.
Cool. So, in summary, for this part, we think we've shown that there's a united power elite in Denmark which integrates the key institutional orders, which would be then business, unions, politics, state, and a bit science. There's a massive turnover of people, but it's incredibly stable. And it's a very homogeneous social group, both through careers and where they live and whatnot, and ideology as well. But obviously, this is not the whole picture of like all the power that there is in Denmark. This, like, Denmark is a little boat in a big sea, and obviously van der Leyen is a much more powerful agent than most of these people. But if anyone is making the decision and steering the boat, then it's going to be within this group. And if we compare the power lead to any positional method, you will find that those who are in the power lead are those that you would regularly find. Also, those who hold the classic powerful position, but with them also a group of highly connected people. Okay, so briefly, we'll just go through what we're working on now, which is teasing out some of the what causes these compositions, right? Or why does the elite look like it does? What the forces it to look like that? And to do that, we've done comparative studies, historical, and to other countries. So the first one we did was a collaboration with a wonderful Swiss team in the Obelisk down in Lausanne, who have like an insane data set on Swiss elites, somewhat similar to the Danish power elite, but from 1910 until 2015. And what you might not be able to see here in these graphs is that we were able to find, with their help, a power elite throughout the period. Or it was actually not really a power elite, because in the beginning it was just mainly just business. In the 1910s and the 30s it was business, but then comes the corporatist system, and now you have this mix between different orders. And then there's a collapse in 2010. It breaks down. That's because of the financial crisis. Everyone got fired in Switzerland, and then it's kind of re-knits itself afterwards. But as you can see, much denser and then fracturing. So we can see like that power elites live in this spectrum of sectoral diversity and density. Okay, so let's see how it looks in Denmark. So what we did was that we took the Danish equivalent to Who's Who from 1910 to 2020, and then we made them into little career networks. So kind of like the organizational hub. So it's slightly different, not a slight, it's a different type of network, but we're trying to measure the same thing. So the interconnectedness in the elite. And you can see not the same picture as in Switzerland, but somewhat similar-ish. So it's in the 1920s, it's a small, less diverse group, and then it becomes larger and more densely connected. So in the 70s and the 90s, it's really, as you can see, really, really dense, with a lot of connection between sectors, which then means that people have careers just switching whatever. And then it becomes less so. So in the 2010, and we forgot to have the 2020, but then the elite becomes smaller and sectors become more disentangled. So what we were seeing what you saw in the slides before on the Danish power elite, we're actually seeing it on its downward slope. Like the power elite is becoming smaller and less sectorially diverse. That's one thing, but it's also changing in its organization, like in how it's composed. So very easily you can see that women entered the elite. So in the 1910s, there were hardly any women in the connected elite, and then it increases substantially from 2000 and onwards. Class background. There's the upper class. It was more dominant in the 20s and less so now, but still very unequal. So it's a lot more stable. Okay, so we see both stability and change. So what's driving this? So we were looking at just the business elite. We're focusing just on the business elite in the Danish Who's Who, and how they're connected. And then we're asking, does that then follow the changes in the real economy? So we would expect that services, the service industry would increase in size, in the share of the elite, and we would expect that agriculture would be important in the beginning and then decrease, and we would expect that finance would also increase in importance because that's how the real economy evolved. But as you can see here on this slide here, it's just flat lines. It has no relationship whatsoever to the real economy in that sense. So the elite as a phenomena is independent of those economic dynamics, which was very surprising for us, I have to admit. So what then is the relationship between elites and the economy and the wider society?
There's at least a relative autonomy to the elite. So the second thing we're trying to do to help us answer some of these questions is to collaborate with a very high number of other scholars in what's called the World Elite Database, short WED, which is down here, where we now have more than 100 scholars from 25 countries that are collecting data on, for now, economic elites. And we've last year we published our first short paper on the findings, and if we look, there's some really interesting differences just if we look at education, like proportion with a doctorate in economic elites. Not surprising to those who know Germany. Germany is very high, but also China and Poland, almost a third has a doctorate. And then we go to Norway, it's 1%. Denmark and Sweden, 5-7%. So very different. Also characteristic that you can actually enter without a university degree in Sweden and Denmark, 12 and 15%. That's higher than almost all other countries. There's also quite a lot of variability in the types of degree people have, and the importance, especially again, of the STEM courses. And there's also a huge difference in how selective universities are. So this is from a paper we're working on now, and what we've done is we've asked how big a proportion of the economic elite studied at a university compared to how big a proportion of the total university of the population of the country studied at that university. And there, China and France are through the roof with relative risks of more than 100 of the average top 5 institutions. And Denmark is by far the most crappy country in that sense, that we don't have institutions that are actually exclusive. But for your sake, we've also taken Sweden, which is a bit an outlier in the Nordics here, with the Handelshögskolan having numbers that are actually larger than Cambridge or Bocconi and similar. The other Swedish institutions bring the Swedish average down, but Stockholm School of Economics is a phenomenon that we usually actually associate with other types of countries. We've also in this tried to make kind of an ideal type of different countries, where we have, to the left side here, we have kind of the places where you have less selective institutions, more field specific degrees, and less prestige, less transnational education. And over here we have high university prestige, relative shorter degrees. So over here you can say you go to a place that has high status, but then you don't need to that much schooling, because you go there for the status and then you can leave without actually learning stuff. So over here we have UK, Canada, US, and also Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Turkey. And if we then, what we've then done is also we've taken some country characteristics. This is really astonishing. So to make this map, we only used information about the education of these economic elites, and this turned out to be extremely correlated to key indicators of economic inequality and well-functioning kind of democratic institutions. All these things up here are from the WeDem project in Gothenburg. So the ranking, so everything that's like a well-functioning liberal democracy, that's the countries up here. Also, actually, PISA scores, GDP per capita, women in the World Elite Database. everything is associated with these types of countries. And down here we have 1%, top 10% income shares, top 10% wealth shares, and return to tertiary education. So we see that dynamics of elite education apparently is also very associated with dynamics of inequality. So tentative conclusions on this last part?
Yeah, is that basically that we've seen these two types of dynamic relationship between economics and then elite composition, right? So on the one hand, basically it seems that elite composition is mainly tied to inequality, and I think it's really interesting to ask us and to investigate further what elements of inequality it is and what's driving perhaps both inequality and elite composition. So I think that's a really interesting avenue of research. Yeah, I think we have taken your time, so thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. And now we continue with the Q&A. Welcome to this part, everyone. And please note that the first half hour of this discussion will be recorded. And we have a few rules to make this Q&A well organized. And it is that if you are attending in person, please raise your hand. And if you have a question, you raise your hand. And if you have a comment or a question on a previous question, you raise a finger. So hand and finger. If you are joining online, please use the Zoom chat to submit your question. And please include your name and area of study. So for example, Joe, philosophy. This helps to ensure that we hear from a range of disciplines. Okay?
Terry? Thanks a lot. This was super interesting. Great. So many questions. But so just a short one and a longer one. So first, what's your take or view on this idea of elite overproduction? That's a short question. The other question is, you might have mentioned this, but seems to me that your analysis does not include, or your model does not include wealth. It's just, these connections, people meeting in rooms and so on. And the question would be, doesn't your model kind of underestimate the power of maybe someone who's not as, extrovert maybe, or, but can still mobilize a lot of resources through, I don't know, lobbying or ad campaigns and so on?
Thanks.
First, I can answer the one on wealth. So, in some sense, it underestimates wealth, but I think we should differentiate between the wealthy that are involved, that want to influence society, and they have to do that through networks. And they might not do them themselves, but then they have representatives who do that. And when we see in the power elite is that we have people who are from the very richest families, but otherwise we would have their CEO. So their CEO would represent them, or the Confederation of Industry. So it's not that they're not represented. Their form of power is not represented, but it's just that only some of them try to influence society. So there's a lot of wealth that just wants to live in quiet and who are not invested at all in changing society, or just satisfied with how it is currently. So, yeah.
I think, we see a very, very sharp distinction between generational wealth, which are either in the network themselves, or their organizations are there, or the foundations they control. So there we might ask people to add some contextual knowledge. I think that's also the strength of doing network analysis. We can see the name of the organization. So if we were in Sweden, maybe the Wallenbergs would not be there, but we would have people we know the Wallenbergs appointed. So if you want to know if the Wallenbergs are influential or not, you can say, well, these people who are in the network are appointed by the Wallenbergs, so we should be able to assume that. But what we also see is that there are very few people who are appointed by first generational wealth. It's also because there's not a lot of, unlike in Sweden, there's not a lot of new rich people in Denmark, because basically our businesses are stale and you cannot. So there's not a lot so we also see kind of the difference between those who are self-made men or women and have built their own firm, and then those who have the generational wealth and are trying to have a kind of wider societal impact. So I actually think the method gives us a really good idea about how different types of wealth functions in these networks. As to the lead over reproduction and Peter Churchin's work on this, I think there's a really I think I would be conceptually, I think I would not necessarily, it's not power elite over reproduction, but it's an example. The idea about elite over reproduction is basically we educate too many people that expect to have a successful upper middle class or upper class position power, don't get it, and then they get angry and start burning, start kind of producing different kind of counter elites. And I think there's definitely a lot of kind of interesting dynamics here about the kind of different smaller counter elite networks that we could observe, but
it's difficult to say whether it's a strong dynamic in Denmark. Perhaps it's about like that, because if you know that you have to do hard work and you're not entitled through your education, perhaps expectations is just lower. And Danes are good with low expectations. That's our main shtick, actually.
Yeah. so my guess would also be that it's. I think it's clearly something that is, I think, to some extent important in the current American dynamic. I think it was also, Bourdieu also argues how this is a very important dynamic around 1968 in France, that you have a generation of people that thought that you actually were going to make it almost to the power elite by going to elite schools, and suddenly there was this. So I think it's a very important dynamic that we have systems that endow people with some sort of capital or power, but they can also see that sort of capital no longer leads to positions of power, which is, in my view, very much what has happened with cultural capital, in particular, also in a country like Denmark.
Just a short follow-up on the wealth question. I think that was a good point, but my point is that maybe if you kind of gave more importance to wealth, maybe the union boss and the trade confederation boss would not be at the top, or I mean, might change the look of the core.
Just a short follow on that.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up. I do understand your question, and we are doing this together in Sweden. I mean, it's basically what like kind of capital you're valuing is a social capital, which is this looks at social capital. But me and Olle are like latching on here, and we're sketching actually to make a similar roster for Sweden, but also then trying to actually see what kind of wealth they possess. So that is a part of our design. To try to like expand this work even more, and it will be interesting, I think, but only for the economic and political elites, and also try to maybe see also the transaction flows, because you know that there are a lot of ownership, since we have for-profit welfare companies on this verge. So we are working on it in some way.
I think also some of the dynamic here is that corporate lobbying very much happened through what you in the literature in at least in Scandinavia call an inner circle dynamic, that it's done on behalf of the class as a whole or on a group level. So basically, to some extent, the rich also have people to do their network for them, and that's also why I think it's important to kind of highlight how many corporate leaders or business association leaders are in this network, because they are of course also hired to take care of the interests of others.
But we should also note that a lot of wealth and financial power in Denmark is controlled by unions and by public institutions. So it's also that private wealth is strong, but is not as strong as in many other countries, because there's many other ways of getting capital than through ties to families, like
the
ties
union
to
leader
unions.
is the chairman of the board of a major bank. He's also the chair of a major institutional investor. So he also, if not wields personal wealth, wields a lot of economic power.
Janine?
Thank you very much. This was very illuminating, and I've enjoyed following your work from a distance for a while. I have 4 questions. The first has to do with your institutionally stable positions. And my question is, when those people in the institutions leave their positions, does someone in the network take over? Is it someone in that network? That would be what I've seen, and somebody who's intimately affiliated with that same network. So that's my first question. Second question has to do with, that was your fault lines between those who are elected and those who are not. My question is, what are the implications in terms of influencing for those who are elected and those who are not? Are those who are, how does that shake out in terms of actually exerting influence? Third question is, the disentangling of sectors. Now, that is something that you saw, that is being seen in Switzerland as well as Denmark.
Yeah.
And when did that start happening? I've seen that in the United States, and I want to know, when did you start seeing, when does it come up in your data set as happening? Well, and you can,
So
you can remember all 4 questions.
Yeah, no, it's difficult to remember all 4.
Okay.
So let's start with the 2 first, and then we'll. Is that okay? So the first one, remind me again. So it was.
So it's about
replacement.
The network. So the institutionally stable positions and what happens.
It's a really, really interesting thing. So there's two ways it can happen. So if it's a really institutionalized role, so let's say it's a specific role that you have in the corporatist system. So let's say it's the Metal Workers Union chair, the chair of that. Then you just simply inherit. You just inherit most of the positions. So. Because the boards that they sit in, it's stipulated that it's the chairman of the Metal Workers Union, right, who will be there. So it's baked in for some of these. So there, in some cases, it's just straight inheritance from the organizations. Right. But in other cases, if they are more free floating, like a chairman for a university or whatever, then they're going to be when they retire, they're going to be replaced by someone. If it's someone really well connected, then they're going to be replaced by someone who is also really well connected. That's
in that same network.
In that broader network, but it's rarely just like a switch 1-to-1. So if it's a former conservative minister who's turned to becoming a professional chairman, then it won't be like a switch to another right-wing politician. It will be to someone else, somewhat in that centrist, slightly politically affiliated person.
To some extent, you can say the 400 people in the core are the long list. Whenever some of these things are, then there's of course other criteria that may mean you make the shortlist when the decision is made, but it's very, very often the same set of people in a new constellation. The picture I showed in the conclusion, Anton would not allow me to elaborate on the picture. We had a picture of that is actually what it feels like to collect data here. It's an old Danish war hero who was defending a Swedish city he took in battle. It's called Tordenskjold, which means Thunder Shield, really cool name as well. And what he did was, in order to convince the Swedish people that his army was very strong, he kept up lining his soldiers. So he showed them around the cities, and then the soldiers ran in the back. So it seemed like he had a huge army, but it was the same people over and over again. That's what it feels like going through these networks. It's kind of the same people, but standing in a shortly new order. I think to some extent it's the same kind of dynamics, not necessarily that you always select the one you have the strongest personal tie to, but you select somebody who's really well embedded and trusted in the network, and where you can ask your peers about information about whether or not that candidate works in practice.
Second question was about fault lines. And
The fault line, yeah. So what's the political implication of it? We haven't thought it through, so I don't have a really good answer for it. But I think the implication is that as long as there's a really strong elected part of the space, then you need, if you want to engage with the power elite, you need some type of public capital, some kind of universal legitimacy, which means that it's very difficult for private companies directly to influence, to gain influence directly. They need representation or to translate their own interest into something broader. And I think that is the result of that. So if that part, the elected part, had been outside of the field, then I think you would have a situation where it would be more like in the US now, where you can more directly influence on behalf of your firm, instead of translating into a class-wide interest and then gaining influence.
You can also say the other part, the part that it's apparently there's a lot of difference between elite members that are delegated and elite members that are born into it, or at least part of it, which also I think shows that there is also a potential, at least a division of labor. But what's also characteristic about a lot of the people that are elected is that they are not there as long, not as established. So maybe in some sense we can call them visitors to the elite for a certain period of time, which has a much more precarious position because they need this delegation, which I think in many ways, of course, means that their power is different, and also that, as Anton said, they're there, and it also means that since they're there, that part of the elite needs to have some sort of responsiveness to the rank and file, whether it's members of the business association, members of the union, or electorate if they're politicians.
Thank you. Third question was about the disentanglement of the sectors.
Really good question and really interesting phenomena. I think it hits around the 90s. It starts around the 90s. There's no clear break, but
In both countries, Switzerland
in both countries. It's it's slightly earlier in Switzerland and somewhat later in Denmark. And I think it goes against what you would usually say. Like, we would normally say that careers have become more complex, but that's just not the case. Like, they were more complex back in the day, and now they're becoming more simple or sectorial.
If you want to,
you're saying they're becoming more sectoral oriented, or they're crossing sectors.
They're less crossing sectors than they did usually. And I think it reflects the corporatist system in some way. Like it's the disentanglement of the dissolution of the corporatist system.
There's also another explanation in both countries, is that the size of these organizations grow dramatically. So you also have more concentration in fewer organizational entities, which means that actually you also need to sit fewer people down to coordinate the same level of the economy. I mean, to some extent, it's kind of, there's a little bit of like, you can pick your own word, like, this is also maybe coinciding with the rise of neoliberalism, and at least kind of in European countries, you have like the glorious 30 years from World War II to 1975, where you have kind of the strengthening and building of welfare states, and that kind of ebbs out in the 1990s, and then these very strong corporatist system that have been built starts to wither away to some extent.
Definitely, organizational size is really, really important thing. Which is I think because organizations increase tremendously in size from the 70s and onwards.
Yeah.
So and that's across all sectors. And I guess that means that you can have a career just within fewer larger corporations.
Even though it coincides with the proportion of women in the elite, I don't think that's the explanation, we should say. But it's actually also interesting that the proportion of women rise as the network density drops.
Mm.
So you don't see celebrated, as in the United States, celebrated retired generals who are going to private equity. Okay.
No.
Final question.
So I'm sorry, Janine.
Yeah.
We have this is an interesting talk, and we have a long list of people who want to ask question. So we'll save your question. We'll keep it and save it for last. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. Very, very cool work. So I have two questions. The first is sort of a follow-up to Karim's questions about the wealth. And I think it's very interesting, the thing here that some of these might have private wealth, some might have power over some organizational wealth, and some maybe public wealth. But if you just look at the correlation with sort of the top of the wealth distribution, do you see that all the people in the top wealth distribution are in these networks? And similarly for income, which would be like most important, is it the top of the income distribution or the wealth distribution? And then the second question is about the turnover, which was quite small. But if you look at the intergenerational sort of mobility or persistence, have you looked at whether the new people that come in are these the kids of the previous people? And what share would be like, you know, inheritances versus new people from the outside?
So if we look at the richest families, I can't remember the direct share, but there's a substantial part who are members of the power elite, but only for the really, really richest, like and
The top 10.
Top 10, because fortunes in Denmark are not that large. So they are like, if you compare private fortune,
Depending on, I would like to have all.
yeah, we would love it. Like,
Many.
but if you compare a private fortune to a public fortune, right? And they're very small. So it's only 10-ish families that own companies and who have wealth that is, you know, at a national level of importance. And you can be regionally important or whatever, but not at a national level. You wouldn't wield power that is at that level. Depend on whether income. We don't know, but I would suspect that many of these people would have high incomes, but that the highest earners are probably not in this sample, because it's a different thing. With regards to reproduction and direct reproduction, I don't think we know, but
so around a third are children of the 1%. If we go even further and say who have parents that are mentioned in Who's Who, that's around 15%. And my educated guess from looking at these people would be that perhaps 5% had an elite parent but made success in a different type, and 10% would be inheritors, either of fortune or my dad was a politician and now I am a politician in the same party, or my dad was a union leader and now I'm a union leader. And sorry, these are all gendered, but as you know, it's reflecting how the gender distribution of power and the...
But what we can say is that there's actually very few, it seems like there's quite few power elite dynasties, like the Bush family or something like that. That would be like a handful. So it's not very common, like direct inheritance. And if it happens, it's mainly in economic capital, like for obvious reasons.
Thanks.
Anna. No, I can. Are you? Okay. So then it's Tanja.
Okay, I'm an art historian, so I would have a lot of questions about the data set and what if you're satisfied with that or what it really says. But I thought if it is about 400 people steering Denmark and have a power, I thought if you think about democracy and the things that really matter, like environmental problems and so on, how could we change this power dynamics, or how could we turn these people in the elites to care about things which are sustainable for the nature, for the society, and for democracy? It's a big question, but maybe you can.
I think we do have some reason for. We also wrote a book called Taming the Elite, which was a debate book, and some of that is about how democratic institutions, those who have delegated forms of power, are to at least some degree domesticated elites that have to deliver something. There's also, I think, two potentially positive stories, one of them with a twist in this, because we actually see in Denmark that there are two social movements that have managed to come from the outside and become members of the elite. The first is the unions. You've seen those. They were, of course, not part of the elite 150 years ago, very much there now. Perhaps they are also more interested now in staying in the elite than actually recruiting new members, or they're not very good at recruiting new members at least. So that was but the more in the green sense story is also that the very, very strong farmers movement in Denmark is there, still has their political party, the Liberal Party, and still has a lot of the business association representatives are actually from the Farmers Association. So the bad news there is that they're about as least green as you can imagine. So they're actually, but I think there's a story here. If you look at the distribution of women, you can actually also see kind of the effect of the second wave feminism in the 60s. So we can see that pressures from below can change something. The bad news is sometimes that it takes 50 years. So it's at least in this kind of way where it's this gradual amalgamation where a new group is formed and the elite has to find a way to integrate a group that creates such a strong power base that they can no longer be ignored.
Power elites might actually be quite. They can be responsive to a new problem. So let's say climate change. There's definitely a lot of climate policy in Denmark, and there's a huge change in how we produce energy. But the power elite thinks in a specific way. It really likes keeping the status quo and keeping everyone happy, and no one's going to leave the table. So what the types of solutions that they like to do is something that makes everyone happy. So a bit of cake for everyone. So for instance, we are investing heavily in bio-natural gas, which is something that's made from byproducts from farming, which is a very expensive way of doing it, but it keeps the farmers happy. So it's these kind of compromises. The power elite loves compromises or synergies and whatever, right? So they're always oversold on stuff like synergetic, because that is part of the way that they're thinking, which is a bit problematic if you have a crisis which requires that someone leaves the table, that someone is cut out, like no more meat or no more some kind of industry, which is the situation which is very difficult for the power elite to handle.
Yeah, so basically now we don't have, so basically like fossil capital in some way, the way these types of network works is basically they would create a radio group. So if you were to not drill for oil anymore, you'd have to compensate these firms through the roof. But that's kind of, yeah. So I think that's a problematic dimension, that it's very hard to make people leave this elite group, even though you can actually observe like quite clear contradictory interests. If you have managed to become established here, there's also kind of a commitment that you should stay.
Okay, Rebecca is next.
Thank you. So this was a super interesting talk. So many questions, but I'll stick to one. I was wondering where the representatives of the legal profession fits into this. I mean, like top judges, heads of law firms, etc. Some of them would fit into the category of civil servants, but there's also these other groups. So that would be interesting whether that's included, because traditionally they would be parts of the establishment or the elite. Thank you.
So in one of the maps, there was a small group of purple dots in the bottom, and that was actually a group of Supreme Court judges. But they're very much in the periphery of the network. And I think one of the things that had happened in Danish context is actually that the legal system has a fairly high relative autonomy, and also that 25 years ago, there was huge criticism of judges doing too much work outside. But actually that had the consequence that they are no longer very used in these types of networks. So we've actually seen a little bit the same with key medical doctors and stuff like that. You've seen kind of some of these fields specialize and then also become more peripheral and not be completely outside of the network, but not be anymore at the very core. So my hunch would be that we do have about 10% of our people who have a law degree and some key corporate lawyers, but they're also diminishing. So my hunch is that the legal profession has kind of lost a little bit, or continually losing a little bit of its status at the very top.
When we compare to other countries, we can also see that law has varies substantially between countries, the prominence it has. And historically it was really important, but that's actually a long time ago. So it's
and unfortunately now time is up. So for those of you who still have questions, you can ask the presenters afterwards. So please join me now in thanking Christoph and Anton for this very interesting talk.
Thank you.
And before you leave, we have. I'm looking here now for the next. Our next. On June 3rd, we have another seminar where Richard Arneson is presenting a talk on instrumentalism regarding the justification of democracy and the threat of authoritarianism. So that will be a very interesting talk that I hope that you will all come and listen to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.